Is Final Fantasy 15 worth playing in 2023? Yes. But there's a lot you need to know about Final Fantasy 15 and its universe before hopping into it for the first time or revisiting it. Let me explain. Final Fantasy 15 is the latest mainline title in the Final Fantasy series, and it's often hailed as the most hated and weakest entry in the series alongside Final Fantasy 13, which I've also done a video about. And I like Final Fantasy 13, and I think Final Fantasy 15 receives a lot of unjust criticism that doesn't accurately reflect the experience of this game. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of flaws to this game, and there's been several updates since the release of it that have significantly changed the experience to correct for some of these earlier flaws, but I found that even with the vanilla version of this game, I very much enjoyed my experience, and I found that there are very strong aspects that without a doubt that are just adjacent to what the pinnacle of this series has to offer. But Final Fantasy 15 isn't just a game, it's also a universe. The Final Fantasy 15 universe and my story with it. So I played the Royal Edition for this video to more accurately represent what this game looks like today. However, I played through the entirety of the vanilla version of Final Fantasy 15 back in 2016 when it first launched. So I have experience with both editions of this game. For those of you that don't know, and for those of you that do but maybe need a refresher, Final Fantasy 15 had a notorious development cycle of approximately 10 years, along with a complete change in development teams, direction of the game, and the title. Final Fantasy 15 was once Final Fantasy Versus 13. The title change came along with a change in direction of the game due to the poor reception of the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. And in fact, a lot of the aspects of this game are almost a direct response to a lot of the criticism of Final Fantasy 13. Usually when a game gets stuck into a long development cycle, it's because the game's not shaping up to be what the developers were hoping for. And this was pretty prevalent when the game launched in 2016. Although the game reviewed well, there was a lot of discourse around an empty open world, a boring and too simplistic combat system, a fragmented and indigestible story, and at the time, I honestly would have agreed with most of this criticism. This game is pretty rough at launch, especially with the story. The story of Final Fantasy 15 is really split into different mediums of media that all fall within the Final Fantasy 15 universe, which consists of a prequel movie titled Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15, an anime on YouTube, Final Fantasy 15 Brotherhood, DLCs which would come later on for the three main party members that follow the main protagonist, a final DLC of the main villain, a book which would also come later on, which is essentially an epilogue, and before the game came out I consumed all of the prequel media at the time, which was the anime and the movie, and it did give more clarity to the story overall, but you could tell there was still so much missing at this time. This was not a finished game at the time of release, and it was evident in almost every aspect of this game. But over the next couple of years, several things were added, including DLCs, different quests, story cutscenes, and changes to the battle system, and in 2018, the game was re-released as Final Fantasy 15 The Royal Edition, which included all of these updates, along with all the DLC at the time. But even before any of the updates came out or the DLC episodes, or the fixes, I had played and finished the vanilla version of this game. And although it took me a while to get into it and look past all of these issues, I didn't dislike it for all the shortcomings that it had, but I loved it for all the things that it strived to do, and it became one of my favorite games in the series. Brotherhood, the theme of Final Fantasy 15. A lot of Final Fantasy entries, especially the more recent ones, have very strong themes at play that dictate almost everything within these games. For instance, Final Fantasy XIII's theme is fighting fate. The whole game the party runs from their fates, in the story and in the gameplay, where they're traveling from place to place, typically in a very linear fashion, representing that there's only one way forward, which is away from their fate. In Final Fantasy X, the theme is love. The most obvious example of this is Yuna and Tidus, but it's also Yuna and her guardians, and Wakka and Lulu, and Tidus coming to terms with accepting and loving his father, Jet. Both of these two games are structured around these themes. However, this is never more apparent than in the theme of Brotherhood in Final Fantasy 15, and this is why I love this game. I have a handful of very close friends that I've been friends with since I was very young, and I'm still friends with to this day. We've all been through a lot, mostly good times, with a few bad times sprinkled in, and I would consider them all my brothers of a sort. The brotherhood of the main cast of this game is so accurately representative of what it's like to have friends like this that I felt every moment of this game, and it was such a wonderful experience from beginning to end. This theme is the foundation of this game, and it's what kept me pushing through the original version despite all of its shortcomings. And this theme of Brotherhood is what made me excited to come back to it all these years later in the updated version and make this video, which is going to sing its praises and how well this theme is portrayed. I'll also talk about some of the criticism too, so don't worry about that. But as far as the theme of Brotherhood, I honestly can't think of a better way to start off this theme than through a road trip gone awry. The plot and the story. No spoilers. So the game starts off with a cutscene of our main protagonist Noctis and the other main characters that make up the party, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladiolus, talking to the king of their country, Insomnia, King Regis, who is also Noctis' dad. But that's right after the scene where there's an older version of the whole crew at the Capitol and all hell seems to be breaking loose. And maybe this is foreshadowing, but all this happens later on, so that's for you to find out. But back to the cutscene with Noctis' dad. The scene is short, but you immediately get a sense of the type of relationship that Noctis has with his dad, which is troubled to say the least. Noctis' dad then tasks Noctis and the party with the mission of meeting up with Noctis' future wife and longtime childhood friend, Lunafreya, from which Noctis and Lunafreya will then be sealed together in holy matrimony while Noctis' dad signs a treaty with the rivaling neighbor nation of the Empire of Niflheim. Right before Noctis and the crew take off, the king meets them by the main vehicle of transportation that the crew will be using throughout this game, the Regalia, and he addresses his son with a worrying and loving expression and tells him to walk tall on his journey. Noctis, thinking nothing of it, basically says thanks dad and toodaloo. We as the audience get an impression that there is strife in Noctis' dad, King Regis, with letting him go on this journey and things may not be as they seem, especially after the intro cutscene when all hell was breaking loose. But again, that's later on, so we'll let that be. Anyway, this leads to the true introduction, where the Regalia is broken down and now the party must push this massive vehicle to the nearest mechanic in the iconic Hammerhead station. Through this scene, the game makes you push the vehicle for a short period of time, very slowly, as a means for your party to have an opportunity to introduce themselves and explain the relationship dynamic of each party member to one another and to the main protagonist, which you will be playing as Noctis. Along with seeing the beautiful world of Eos that you will be exploring in not too shortly after, this sets up the main theme and the brilliance of this game, the Brotherhood of the main cast. And this is really where the game shines, as I previously stated. The story falls flat in some places, which I'll talk about in my spoiler section at the end of the video, but the real story is the brotherhood that you experience along your journey with the main party members through the open world, the in-moment events, and some random events that may differ from playthrough to playthrough. And this is all excellently demonstrated with this opening segment of your team pushing the Regalia ever so slowly, bantering with one another, while an absolutely beautiful rendition of Stand By Me by Florence and the Machine plays in the background. This perfectly encapsulates what the experience of Final Fantasy XV is going to be like throughout your playthrough, and why you should play this game. But speaking of the beauty of the world of Eos, and the beautiful rendition of Stand By Me that introduces you to it, let's talk about the soundtrack and visuals. Soundtrack and visuals. The soundtrack and visuals are absolutely magnificent. They're some of the best this series has so far. To me, some of the core tenets of a Final Fantasy game are exceptional visuals and a wonderful soundtrack, and Final Fantasy XV absolutely has both. But let's start with the soundtrack. Like Final Fantasy XIII, this is one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. There's a wide range of different types of tracks that play throughout your journey, and majority are magnificent. Here are some of my favorites. The soundtrack to the game is top tier, and I think it rivals Final Fantasy XIII soundtrack, but it doesn't necessarily surpass it. Still, it's phenomenal and always does a great job at providing the appropriate atmosphere. But speaking of atmosphere, let's talk about the visuals. This game is stunning to look at. The world of Eos is fantastical in design and has so many different locales that are unique and finely detailed. Each enemy also displays the same attention to detail and in design, and the variety is enormous, which is awesome. And character design, although a little bit samey with the black clothes of the main cast, is also very wonderful, especially with some of the side characters. But speaking of characters, let's now talk about the characters. The main characters. So let's start with the main cast: Noctis, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladiolus. All of the main cast members are done very well in this game as a whole, but there are times where the voice lines or the voice acting is rather poor. But this is the exception and not the rule. Noctis is initially a bratty prince that does not want the role that he's in, or the responsibility of being that prince, and this radiates to all aspects of his character. I wouldn't say that he's unlikable, but he's just immature, and that he's put into a position that he doesn't want to be in based off of his bloodline. And when you put that into perspective, it kind of makes sense. He's also a bit spoiled and doesn't really appreciate all of his friends and family that support him throughout the journey, and this not only can irritate the rest of the party, but also you as a player. However, this is obviously a setup so that he can learn the value of these relationships and grow throughout the game. By the end of the game, I really liked Noctis and thought that he was an excellent main protagonist and one of the best Final Fantasy main characters of all time. Prompto is one of Noctis' best childhood friends and is also one of the 3 main protectors of Noctis, along with Ignis and Gladiolus. Prompto is the life of the party. He's very goofy, fun, and extremely extroverted. I think he's an excellent choice to be one of the 4 main party members. He also takes photos of the main party and events that happen throughout your journey, and it's super cool, and it's a super underrated feature of this game. Ignis is the more analytical and mature team member of the main party. He keeps the mission at hand, the main priority, and the team in check. He's kind of like the team's Alfred to their Batman. He also has an undying loyalty to Noctis and his duty to not only serve and protect him, but also as his friend, which is such a joy to experience. His main thing is he likes to cook, which I think not only makes for a cool gameplay mechanic, which I'll discuss a little bit more later, but also adds a lot to his character. He's very precise with his cooking and only makes the best meals, which is very true to his character. He will also drive the regalia from one point to another if you don't want to as you play as Noctis, which makes a lot of sense with him being essentially the leader of the team. Ignis is a great addition to the Final Fantasy 15 universe. Gladiolus is the protective big brother in sorts, and he's pumped full of extra testosterone. He's very protective of the group as a whole, and he's the one to call when the solution to the problem calls for brute strength. He also keeps the crew in check when they get out of line one way or another, but he's also capable of getting out of hand due to the nature of his character. But Ignis is also there to pull him back. He's also a big fan of the outdoors and roughing it, and throughout your journey, he really plays into this, and I think it suits his character very well. Gladiolus is a really good main character for Final Fantasy 15. And that's it for all the main protagonists. This is the party that you will play as throughout the entirety of the game. Normally I would have liked to have a bigger cast, especially for the main characters, but because this game is really about the brotherhood of these 4 characters, I think having 4 main protagonists was definitely the right choice, and all 4 of these characters are wonderful. From this game design, Final Fantasy 15 was going to be a make or break dependent on these characters, and for me, they nailed it with the main cast. But someone they did even better than the main cast was the main villain, Ardyn. Ardyn's not only the best character in the game, he's also one of the best Final Fantasy 15 villains of all time. He's essentially a Final Fantasy Joker. He's constantly mischievous, unpredictable, and menacing. He helps the party out at times, and then turns against them at times too, at an unpredictable pace. His voice lines and voice acting are incredible throughout the whole game. At any moment that he's on screen, he steals the show. Ardyn is a phenomenal villain. But I think there could be even more interesting characters in Final Fantasy 15, but sadly we'll never know due to the lack of time that these characters are on screen. There's a lot of side characters that have so much thought put into them that are just barely in this game. So let's talk about that. The side characters. I've never seen a game introduce such interesting characters not only in design but also in personality just to throw them away shortly after you meet them. And the most egregious example of this is the main love interest in the game, Lunafreya. Through playing the main story of this game, I know absolutely nothing about this character besides the fact that she was childhood friends to Noctis and that she's his betrothed. They give her almost no screen time, and it makes you wonder if she even likes Noctis in a romantic sense. She was also built up to be one of the main focus points of the story, and they do almost nothing with her character besides one pivotal point in the story. She seems to be a pure-hearted, brave young woman that is in love with the king-to-be, but there's no real screen time that these two share to show this love besides the friendship scenes from several years ago when they were very young kids. Kids being friends doesn't necessarily signify a romantic relationship developing, but apparently there is one. It's absolutely insane that they did this to this character in this way. But again, since you aren't really introduced to this character well, it doesn't hurt as much as the characters that you were appropriately introduced to, but then the game almost immediately puts him on the back bench to only be brought up later for a very short time, or not at all. And the two most disappointing examples of this are Iris and Aranea. Iris is Gladio's little sister. You meet her later on in the story and she teams up with your party for a little while in order to complete a specific quest with the party. They also give her a little bit of screen time to not only introduce her character properly, but also to get a feel of her relationships with the main party, especially with her big brother, and metaphorically the party's big brother, Gladiolus, and her interest in Noctis. To contrast the strong and protective big brother archetype that Gladiolus is, Iris is very feminine, supportive, and caring, while also being strong in her own way. This contrast between the two is very excellent, and maybe explains a little bit more why Gladiolus is protective as he is. She also has romantic feelings for Noctis that is explored ever so slightly, but then is quickly thrown to the side. This could have been a very interesting plot point, but it just really isn't followed up on. After the short section that she's in the game, she basically disappears for the rest of the game and only pops up at very specific points. Every moment that she's on the screen is such a delight, and she is such a waste of so much potential. But even worse than this is Aranea Highwind. Arnea is first introduced to you as one of the main side villains of the story. When you first meet her, you have an epic fight with her in one of the early chapters of the game, which gives her a proper introduction. Like Iris, she's then sprinkled throughout the rest of the game in various different places and even joins your party in one particular quest. She's your typical badass female character, but she has a hint of a eccentric nature. From the beginning, you can tell that she's only a weapon for hire and doesn't truly belong to any particular group. You constantly question whether she's actually your friend or your foe anytime you interact with her. There's so much character to her, and her design is super cool, and her fighting styles and moves are very interesting. She's so criminally underused in this game that it makes me sick. And again, the design is great, but you know who has the best design? Sydney is one of the first side characters that you're going to meet in Final Fantasy 15, and what an introduction she has. The dev team knew exactly what they were doing with this character, and I love it. She's not only visually designed well, but she also is a very interesting character, and is kind of a halfway point between the feminine nature of Iris and the badass nature of Arnea. But unlike both of these characters, Sydney is in this game for an extensive period of time, but mainly through side quests. For as much as she's in this game, I really can't complain about the amount of screen time that she has, but I think what she is used for in this game definitely undermines her character, and again is such a waste of potential. If there was ever to be a Final Fantasy 15-2 where there was an all-female cast, and the previous 4 characters, Sydney, Lunafreya, Iris, and Arnea, could all be main protagonists of this game and make for a fun and very interesting party that I'm sure everybody would be okay with. However, these 4 are not all of the poorly used side characters in this game. Literally everyone else except for the main 4 and the main villain are only in this game for a moment and then cast aside. This is such a shame because the universe has some really interesting characters in it that I would have loved to see more of and learn more about. But you know what you do get to see a lot of? The world of EOS. And of course you do this through gameplay. The non-battle gameplay. So this is essentially an open world road trip Final Fantasy game with your bros, and that's such a cool concept. Throughout the game, you'll be taking the party to various different locations to complete main quests or side quests in the Regalia, which you can drive as Noctis, or you can have Ignis drive to a set destination automatically, which is definitely my preferred way of transportation. Through this, the car will drive from where you are to your destination over a period of real time. This can be as short as 1 minute away or 8+ minutes away, just depending on how far you want to travel. There are also some places at certain times that will allow you to fast travel to them while you attempt to get into your car for a very low price, which is a nice addition. And again, some of these drives can take a long time getting from where you are to the place you want to go, and you're not really doing anything if you let Ignis drive. And I think this might turn some people off, as they might see it as a glorified 8-minute loading screen, but that's not what it is. Throughout the drive, the party will converse with one another. You'll see the stunning world of EOS and its inhabitants, and you'll get the opportunity to make spur-of-the-moment stops for Prompto to get a picture, or for Ignis or Gladiolus to investigate a certain area of interest. And my favorite, you'll get to listen to previous Final Fantasy tracks if you purchase them at gas stations that you visited throughout the world. If you've seen my previous video, you know I was bumping the Final Fantasy 13 soundtrack the whole time. But there is a catch to this. The Regalia is a car and thus cannot go off-road, initially anyway. So there's another early game traversal method that you can unlock, which is Chocobos. And this game has the best implementation of Chocobos in any Final Fantasy game that I've played. Once you unlock the Chocobos from a very specific side mission, you can purchase the number of days that you can rent your Chocobo, and you can call it on demand almost anywhere in the open world. Obviously, it's less effective than using the Regalia, but when you're in an area where you can't use it, your Chocobo is a much better option of transportation than just hoofing it. And the more you use your Chocobo, the better it gets through leveling up. And if you compete in Chocobo races, you can customize your Chocobo and your party's Chocobo's aesthetics, which primarily is the color of the Chocobo, but for Noctis's Chocobo, you can also put medals from the races that you've won on them. Triple and, if you camp when your Chocobo's out, you can see them in the camp scenes and feed them special greens that can increase their stamina or make them faster overall. Or both. This is the game that made me a big fan of Chocobos. But let's talk about why you're going from place to place and what you'll be doing there. Most quests outside of the main story quest will have Noctis in the party doing one of two things. It's either a fetch quest or it's a hunt mission. The fetch quests are a bit disappointing and they're very typical. The hunt missions are a little bit more interesting, particularly because there's a lot of different monsters in this world that you won't see or maybe only see very seldomly throughout your 30+ hour playthrough that you'll get to track down and fight through the hunt mission. But the real fun for this, for both types of quests, is tackling how you're going to get there in an effective and timely manner. Another aspect of the road trip gameplay is the day and night cycle. During the day, travel is not only ideal due to the visual clarity, but it's also safer. At night, stronger monsters, collectively referred to as demons, come out and can really wreck your adventure. In fact, at night, Ignis will refuse to drive, and you have to manually take the wheel as Noctis. However, even if you drive for a very specific short distance, demons will appear on the road and stop the Regalia in its tracks, and you either have to fight these strong monsters to clear out the road, to only do it again shortly after that, or you can run away and find a nearby spot to rest for the night. But if you travel too far from the Regalia, you'll have to go back to it in the morning to continue the road trip from where you left it, or you can have it towed to a station for a reasonable amount of gil. Both options are rather inconvenient, especially due to the limited amount of time that you have during the day to achieve your tasks and return to a safe haven before night sets in. None of this is really going to stop you from completing your goals, but it'll definitely slow you down. All of these different modes of travel combined with the day and night cycle and the questing system really makes for an interesting experience for traveling through the world of EOS, which is fairly engaging. But what I found most engaging, for better and for worse, was the other major part of gameplay: the battle system. So this is an absolutely non-traditional Final Fantasy battle system that more resembles an action RPG. And I'm here for it. While I love the traditional turn-based combat, I also love action RPGs, kind of like anything that From Software puts out. And Final Fantasy XV's combat is almost halfway between these two. So there are two ways which you can engage with this battle system, and that's through the active battle system and the wait mode battle system. I tried the wait mode battle system for a very short period of time, and I found that it just wasn't for me, so I quickly switched back to the active battle system. Plus, I think that's how the game was originally designed for you to play, and the wait mode was added due to some of the backlash, so that's how I played it. For this battle system, you are only ever in control of Noctis, while the rest of the party operates automatically and independently. There are upgrades that you can unlock early on that allow you to play as any of the other 3 main party members, which was added in the Royal Edition, which is really cool, but it's not necessarily practical, so I mostly stuck with playing as Noctis. When you play as Noctis, you basically have 2 main acts that you can perform that have a ton of different variations. And those are either attack or defend. You attack with one button, and then you defend with another. However, you have 4 weapons that you can equip to the weapon wheel for Noctis that can be changed at any time by using the D-pad. Each enemy type is going to be affected differently by specific types of weapons, which is indicated through different colors of the damage numbers, with yellow showing that the enemy is most weak to this weapon, purple showing that the enemy is weak to this weapon but it's not the most effective weapon, and white being the least effective or just normal damage. So for attacking as Noctis, you're basically switching between weapons until you find the one that you want to use, and then you hold down the attack button in the direction of the enemy that you want to attack. You can also lock onto the enemy, which is really helpful. The issue with this is, of course, that the enemy usually attacks back, so you need to manage attacking the enemy at the right time and then defending against the enemy at the right time. You defend by holding down the defend button to either phase through the enemy's attacks for a small cost of MP, or to block their attacks completely, which allows you to parry them, which does a significant amount of damage that might even stagger them as well. If you stagger an enemy, they become vulnerable for extra damage that can be done for a short period of time while they're staggered, and they may be unable to retaliate. And again, this can be done by blocking and parrying, but it can also be done through attacking normally and reaching a certain threshold, especially with weapons that they're weak to. You can also perform a dodge roll to roll out of attacks if you double press the defend button, but I was not aware of this until the end of the game, so I barely used this. However, some enemy attacks are unblockable and cannot be phased through, so the appropriate defense is to dodge roll away. Also, consistently phasing through attacks will burn through your MP, and you'll run out of it, and you won't be able to phase through any of the enemy's attacks anymore, and they'll all connect, thus hurting Noctis. But speaking of MP, you have MP that allows Noctis to not only phase through enemy attacks, but also to warp from place to place by throwing his weapon and then warping to its location. You can do this to also get away from enemies' attacks, to warp to a warp site, which allows Noctis to hang from said warp site and immediately get a full recharge of his MP, and then of course my favorite, you can warp strike, which sends you directly into an attack of whichever enemy you want to lock onto, which does significantly more damage than a normal attack. However, if you run out of MP, you will go into stasis, where Noctis cannot perform any actions that require MP, and if you try to do any of these actions, he will stumble trying to do these actions, which leaves him very vulnerable for a short period of time. MP is a really cool addition to the battle system, and I think it fits well in Final Fantasy XV. But that's not all. Like I said a bit earlier, you have a whole party in battle with you. While you only ever control one character at a time, which is probably going to be Noctis, you command the other teammates to do specific actions through their techniques, which can also be upgraded and customized. There are several different techniques that each character can have, and each one can only be equipped one, but you can use any of the 3 in battle. To use one of these techniques, it's going to cost you a certain amount of technique bars, which are displayed on the technique gauge that builds up over the course of the battle. Again, there are several different versions of these techniques that differ from character to character, and each character absolutely has a certain predilection towards certain types of techniques, which not only fits their character, but fits the battle system very well. Also, the other party members can team up with Noctis to perform a blindside attack, which is where you attack an enemy from behind to do extra damage, and for link attacks, which are special attacks propagated by being in close proximity to one another for a certain amount of time, and these do extra damage, and they look super cool as well. Later down the road, Noctis unlocks an ability, which is basically a limit break, that's called the Arminger, which allows him to just unleash a ridiculous amount of attacks in a very short amount of time to do a significant amount of damage to whatever foe you're fighting, and it looks great. But what looks even better are the summons. Once a particular summon is unlocked, in very specific situations in battle, Noctis can perform a summon and unleash a massive amount of damage to the enemies that you're engaged in battle with. How this works exactly, I mean, I still don't know. With each summon, which there are 6 of, there are specific situations that must be meant for them to be summoned. You most likely will see Ramuh 90% of the time throughout the summons options, and this usually happens when the battle is going on for an extended period of time, or the party or Noctis has been knocked down too many times, and when the right conditions have been met, there will be a prompt to summon, and and the battle music will change to the summon music, which indicates that a summon is ready. If you hold down the button on the prompt, the summon will commence and you will be treated to a magnificent cutscene. The summons look really cool, they always have a great cutscene with them, and they're typically pretty overpowered and pretty much wipe out any enemy that's on the field. But it does seem like a lot of times, in order to summon, you have to either be close to being knocked down or have been knocked down several times. So speaking of that, let's talk about how the HP system and the healing system works. So every time you or a party member takes damage, you lose HP, but you can also lose your max HP. It just depends on what type of attack connects with you or your party members. You recover HP by using some sort of potion, but the potion can only restore your max HP. In order to regain your max HP, you have to use an elixir, which you can probably guess is more rare and more expensive than a potion. You can also recover HP by allowing time to pass in battle without getting hit, but this is very slow and very ineffective. If a party member's HP drops to 0, they're knocked down, and you can no longer participate in the battle in this state. In order to recover from this, all you have to do is use some type of healing item that restores their HP, or wait for another party member to pick them up, which restores a very small amount of HP. While the party member is down, their max HP stat depletes pretty significantly at a fairly quick pace. If their max HP hits 0, then the party member is considered dead. At this point, the only way to bring them back is by using a Phoenix down, which is very rare and expensive. If every party member's max HP reaches 0, then it's game over. And that's how the healing system works. But there's also one more major aspect of the battle system that I would argue has fans split down the middle on whether it's ineffective or super effective. And that is, of course, magic. Magic. OP or trash? Magic in this game is super weird. You have to first forge for it by finding elemental deposits and extracting the elemency that you then can craft spells from. You can extract up to 99 elemency in the 3 different types of element: fire, ice, and lightning. From this, you really do have to craft the spell. You select how much of an element you want to use for each element to craft one single spell that you can then add items to, which changes its attributes. But you also can just select one element and use a specific amount of elemency to make a spell, which is probably primarily what you'll be doing early on. And because of this, people think that the magic system is trash. However, if you upgrade the magic and add powerful items to the crafting system, when crafting your spell, magic becomes quickly overpowered and makes almost any fight trivial and can even one-shot most enemies, including bosses. But this is definitely towards the end of the game and requires a lot of trial and error. So the power of a spell is determined by its proficiency, which is displayed before crafting it. So you can essentially play around with the system and see how different items affect the structure of the spell. For instance, if you craft a spell with 50 elemency of fire, you will only get a fire spell that you can use 3 times with a low proficiency. If you craft a spell with all 99 fire elemency, you'll get a Fire spell, which has a wider area of effect than the fire spell and a higher proficiency, but you'll still only have 3 of these. However, if you add a very rare item into that crafting system and use a very generous number of that item, you may be able to craft a Fire with an even wider area of effect and a much higher proficiency that can be 5 times more powerful or even greater. And it can also have several more uses than just the 3. Some items that you add to this crafting system decrease the proficiency, but it gives you a vastly larger number of spells to use. Some items in the crafting system will change the spell completely and allow you to heal every time you use that spell. Some items will put certain attributes onto the said spell that may inflict some type of ailment onto the enemy that you're casting it on, like, for instance, death. Some items will allow the spell to be a multicast spell, which means that the spell can be cast several times within a row. Some items will also allow 2 different types of spells to be cast at the same time as well. Therefore, the system is very complex and you can play around with it to find a combination of elemency and items to make a spell that best suits your playstyle. But again, you have to have these items. So most of this is going to happen in the end game. But when you're able to craft these items, it's pretty glorious. And again, to get to this point, you'll have to engage with another major system of the game: the leveling system. Final Fantasy 15 has a different style of leveling than any other Final Fantasy game before it. That is, in order to level up, you have to rest in an appropriate area. And these are either camping spots, hotels, or inns. You'll still gain XP from battling and completing missions, but you can only cash in this XP through these designated rest areas. And I think this is a really cool system overall. For a Final Fantasy road trip bro simulator, I think camping is a great implementation for leveling. Not only because it fits the theme very well, but it also allows you to get to know your party members a little bit more as they help you set up camp, as you review the pictures that Prompto has taken of you and the team. And sometimes you have a little fireside chat with the team, and then at times as well, a specific party member will want you to help out in the morning after camping. When you level up at a campsite, all of the XP that you've earned throughout the day will be appropriately given to the characters, and they will level up if they cross the level threshold. Once a character levels up, all of their stats will increase, which is primarily HP, defense, Noctis's MP, and their attack damage. However, I also mentioned that there are hotels and inns which you can stay at as well. So what role do these play in the game? At major pit stop points and areas of interest, there will be hotels and inns that you can stay at for a cost of gil. The hotels and inns are not only here to meet the aesthetics of the places that they're in, but also to give a bonus multiplier to the amount of XP that you cash in when leveling up when you rest at these areas. This is very advantageous if you have a lot of XP accrued. However, the higher the bonus that these hotels and inns have, the more expensive it is to stay there. So there's a give and take to this system. But this isn't the only way to gain an XP bonus. You can also get an XP bonus from cooking or eating specific meals, which is also another major mechanic in this game. You can eat meals at a restaurant or at a pit stop or town for money. The other option is to have Ignis cook you a meal at a campsite for only the cost of the ingredients to make the meal. You get these ingredients from either killing monsters, foraging for them, or buying them at shops. And hot damn do they look good. Unfortunately, only a few very specific in-game meals will have the XP bonus. But most other meals will have a substantial increase to HP, attack power, defense, or resistance to status elements, which is always helpful. The other main leveling system in this game is the Ascension system, which is basically the Crystarium or Sphere Grid from other Final Fantasy titles. But the Ascension system is much more simplistic and limited in scope than these other systems, while also having fewer branches and upgrades as a whole. However, some of these upgrades are very significant in what they do. So there are various different sections of the upgrades that upgrade specific attributes. For instance, there's a stat section where you upgrade your stats, combat section where you upgrade Nautilus' combat techniques, a teamwork section where you can unlock and upgrade the effectiveness of other party members' techniques, a magic section where you can upgrade all things magic, along with several other sections. Depending on your playstyle, some of these sections can be avoided completely, allowing you to hyper-focus on the sections that you want. For some of these sections, like the combat section, some of the early on upgrades make a huge difference in their respective areas. However, some other sections only really get good after you get close to maxing them out, and you acquire these upgrades through spending your Ascension points, or AP. You get AP in a similar manner as you get XP, but there's very specific things that give you AP, and some of these upgrades in the Ascension system can allow you to get more AP for doing standard things like riding in the regalia or on your chocobo, along with using magic or making a camping site, to name a few. Overall, I really like this system, and some of these upgrades completely change the game, especially the later ones. Alright, now it's time to get into the real juicy stuff of this video, and that's where this game falters as not just a Final Fantasy game, but as a standard AAA experience, but also where it thrives as a Final Fantasy game, and how it becomes a magnificent experience overall. The pitfalls and achievements of Final Fantasy 15. This game is probably the most criticized Final Fantasy game of all time, even more so than Final Fantasy 13. And again, I think that Final Fantasy 13 is a great game, and I feel very similarly about this game. But there is a reason why this game has so much backlash. So let's explore it, shall we? The main reason why this game is so criticized is its battle system, its open world, chapter 13, and its storytelling. I'm going to tackle these one by one. The main issues with the battle system is that it feels like it just plays itself, and there's no real danger of ever losing a battle if you have plenty of healing items. So this game is not hard, and it's very unlikely that you'll face a game over screen throughout your playthrough. I never had a game over screen over my 30+ hour playthrough, but I did have fights that were way too powerful for my current level that were consistently one-shotting me and my team. However, I had plenty of healing items, so anytime I or one of my party members would get down, I would just use my healing items, and then I'd be good to go. And I would eventually win this fight, but it would be a constant cycle of either Noctis getting downed, or one of my party members getting down, and then me having to revive them, get in a couple attacks, them getting down again, revive them, and then get in a couple more attacks, and so on and so forth. But with certain fights, I would run away from them, because most of the time, it wouldn't be worth the cost of all the healing items that I would have to use to win the fight. I get why this would rub people the wrong way, and it makes it seem like there's no real challenge to the battle system. And by the traditional definition of a hard Final Fantasy fight, meaning that it's hard to win, this game isn't particularly challenging. But instead what it is more of a challenge in the means of survival, which again fits the theme of this game. It's more about resource management and completing the quest effectively. But again, I get why people wouldn't like this in a Final Fantasy game. As far as this game playing itself, I really just don't agree with this. There's always a ton of different things going on at once, and management of your party needs to be done throughout the battle. But technically, if you just hold down the attack button, yes, the game does do the optimal attacks for you. But again, there's just so much to the system, with the changing weapons, the managing your party, engaging with very special attacks, the positioning, that also plays a huge role, along with various other elements. And personally, I really liked it. And it also looks phenomenal. As far as the open world goes, the main point of criticism here is that it's way too empty, and there's really nothing to do besides fetch quests and hunt missions. And yeah, this is kind of true. The open world is pretty empty, but it's stunning to look at, and significantly varied in locales. Again, I think this criticism misses the point of this game, and it was never intended to be an open world that had tons of stuff to do in it. It was always a world designed for you to experience it, not necessarily have a lot to do in it. That's why everything that you do in this game takes you a significant amount of time to get from one place to another. This is a road trip game. You are supposed to stop and see the world of Eos as you're passing through it. Would it have been nice if there was more stuff to do in it? Yeah, I'd say so, but that's just not how it is. What it is, though, is a magnificent world overall, and it was a joy to experience traveling through it. But what's not magnificent, and probably does deserve a lot of the criticism, is Chapter 13. Okay, full spoilers for Chapter 13, and very minor spoilers for the rest of the story. If you don't want to be spoiled on Chapter 13, skip to this timestamp. If you don't want to be spoiled for Chapter 13 with some of the minor spoilers for the rest of the story, skip to this timestamp. Alright, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Chapter 13 sucks. There's really no saving it. But I don't think it sucks as bad as people make it out to be. Basically, in this chapter, you get separated from the rest of your party, you lose all of your weapons, and the only item that you have to defend yourself is the Ring of Lucius, which allows you to slow an enemy over a period of time and inflict death on them, which kills them for the cost of MP. This visually and aesthetically, with all the voices talking and the sound that it makes when you do it, is awesome. But it's not particularly fun. You can also do an area of effect attack, which creates a dimensional rift that sucks all of the enemies within a specific diameter into it and then kills them. This costs all of your MP, but it looks even cooler than the death spell. But again, like the death spell, it isn't particularly fun. But why Chapter 13 really sucks is because it's super linear and it takes a long time to get through it. This is a pretty long chapter. There are some powerful enemies in this chapter as well that are stalking you in very narrow hallways that you have to go down to progress. These enemies can be avoided by hiding, which introduces a stealth mechanic, but you can also just cast death on them if you're far enough away to remove them from the equation. But by far the most annoying thing about this chapter is the seemingly dead robots on the floor that you have to run past that will grab you, make you mash the run button to free yourself of them. Yeah, this chapter just sucks, and some people act like it's the worst thing known to man, but I don't think it's that bad. It's just a pretty bad chapter in a good Final Fantasy game. And for the Royal Edition, you can play the chapter as the other party members that you get separated from, and it's definitely pushed on you to do this, so they knew this chapter sucked when they were making the Royal Edition and wanted to give you a way out of it, so that was nice, I guess. The story of this game gets dunked on pretty hard too, and again, I understand why, but I only partially agree with this criticism. The story in the vanilla version of this game was much rougher than the Royal Edition, and even the Royal Edition story isn't great. The plot, the setup, the Brotherhood theme, and the lore are absolutely top tier. But the execution of the story as a whole is pretty subpar at times, with moments of excellence scattered in there. The most egregious example of this is just the storytelling as a whole. The story in the Royal Edition is basically a patched up version of the original story. There are a ton of problems with the original story, with the main thing being that most of the initial pivotal points of this with some of the main characters' relations, Lunafreya, were either done off screen or not at all, or just completely told to us through things like a newspaper. In fact, the whole invasion of Insomnia and the death of King Regis happens off screen, and Noctis only finds out about this through a newspaper. This is just bad. The Royal Edition includes scenes from the movie Kingsglaive. You see how the Empire invades Insomnia and how the king dies specifically, and this is better than nothing, but it's still super weird because it's clear that this isn't part of the game and that it's a section from a different type of media while also having a lack of sound outside of the background music. There's a few scenes like this, but what's really off-putting are some of the voice lines and the voice acting. At times the voice lines and voice acting is just magnificent, but at other times it's just bad. So much of the dialogue is in the moment, especially when you're traversing the world, and so many times characters will talk over one another and it just completely takes you out of the experience. But even with some of the cutscenes, the voice lines are just so out of place and the voice acting is so stale, which is insane because the DLC episodes or the side missions that were added later on are excellent. So it really wasn't a problem with the voice actors or the writers, it just seems like the story was super rushed and a second thought to all the other aspects of the game like the Brotherhood theme and the open world. And thankfully this makes up for so much of the shortcomings of this game. I'm absolutely going to steal this next bit from Skills Up review of this game that he did about 6 years ago, which is a great review, you should go check it out by the way. But one of the things he left us with at the end of his video was the sense that this game makes you feel what's going on in the game. When epic set pieces are going on, you feel the scale of the event and the intensity of the situation. When you are walking around at night and the sun has fallen, you have a sense of unease and dread while desperately trying to find the nearest campsite. When you're in a tough battle that overall is visually stunning and your party is on the ropes and you get the prompt to summon, you get the immediate relief and excitement to see and feel the pure power of these summons as they obliterate your enemies. When the boys are bonding over a shared activity, you feel the strength of their relationship and the joy they experience by simply just having one another. You also feel the strain on their relationship when they fight, and you want it resolved as soon as possible. This is the most emotional Final Fantasy game to date, and you experience a range of emotions throughout your journey, and this is what makes it such a wonderful experience. It may have a ton of shortcomings, and it may not be the absolutely best playing experience at times either, but the experience as a whole is exceptional, and the ending is not only one of the best endings to any Final Fantasy game, but it's a perfect payoff for all that was building up before it. Absolutely magnificent. Alright, one more quick section that I have to talk about before wrapping up this video. DLC. So there's a lot of DLC in this game, specifically in the Royal Edition. If you want to experience the full story of Final Fantasy XV and the universe, you really need to play them. I'll do a quick rundown of each main episode. During the main story, there are 3 specific sections where one party member of the 3 other party members will leave the team and go do something else. During these sections is when each DLC episode takes place, respectively. Episode Gladiolus is the first one. It's also the shortest and the weakest. In this episode, the gameplay is changed up a little bit, as you are only playing as Gladiolus, but overall it's very short and it doesn't really offer much more to the story overall, but it does give you good perspective on how much Gladiolus cares for the party and the mission at hand, and it's just more bonding time for Gladiolus as a whole. So for that, it's pretty good. Episode Prompto is next, and it's arguably the best. This episode takes place when Prompto gets separated from the party and explores what happens during that time while filling out a huge portion of Prompto's backstory. The gameplay in this episode is significantly different to anything before it, and is essentially a third-person shooter, which is great. Also, Aranea joins up with him for a good portion of this campaign, so it's really cool. Episode Ignis is next, and while the gameplay is definitely different from the main game, there's nothing that's staggeringly different or exciting like episode Prompto. But the story that takes place here is top tier and explains why a certain major thing happens at a specific pivotal chapter in the main game that is never explained in the main game. And finally, we have episode Arden, which isn't included in the Royal Edition, but is very cheap and thoroughly explores the backstory of Arden, which is essential to the Final Fantasy XV universe. If you want to know more about Arden and the lore of Eos, this is the episode to play. The gameplay is very similar to the main game, so there's nothing really exciting here, but the story and lore that is brought into this episode fleshes out so much of the world of Final Fantasy XV that this alone makes this episode worth it. To be frank, all these episodes should have been in the base game at launch, and they should have been implemented into the game appropriately, but they weren't, and they're here now in the most updated version of the game, which is the one that you would most likely play today. So that makes up for it, I guess. Conclusion. Final Fantasy XV is the most criticized Final Fantasy game of all time, and is often referred to as the worst as well. I strongly disagree with that statement, and I think this is a wonderful experience if you go into the game wanting to enjoy the experience and focus on this instead of its shortcomings. I really like the combat, even though it seems very simple at first, and definitely is easy. I love the characters and plot, although at times the voice lines and voice acting can be very subpar, and there are pivotal points of the story that are either just missing or phoned in. The world of Eos is so interesting and beautiful, and I thoroughly enjoyed traversing it throughout my playthrough. And I absolutely adore the theme of Brotherhood in this game, and I think they knock it out of the park like no other game has done before it. This is a very emotional Final Fantasy that is exciting, happy, sad, tense, loving, caring, tear-jerking, and satisfying. You feel what this game wants you to feel when it wants you to feel it. For this reason, you should absolutely play this game in 2023. If you liked the video and you want to see more like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit the bell notification, that way you don't miss out on any future videos. And leave a comment and tell me what you thought about the video and what you would like to see me do next. Again, thank you for all the support. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I love seeing what y'all think about the videos and your opinions on the game in the comments. Next up for me is probably going to be Final Fantasy XVI, because it's coming out very soon. But I also want to do a video on Final Fantasy X and the Nier series soon as well, especially Drakengard. Let me know what you want to see next. But until then, I wish you all the very best, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye!